Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Angie Alita Newell. She's a member of the Lidley Q Nation and a historian and the author of a new book, All I See Is Violence. Welcome, Angie. This is going to be a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I won the IPBA Book Award for that novel. It used to be called the Benjamin Franklin Book Award, but they recently renamed it. And this September, I will be a speaker at the Chicago Litro Fest. It's a free literary festival held in Chicago, September, I think it's 12th and 13th.
Okay. So this is that's coming up.
Sign some books. I went to New York and I did that and it was exciting. I didn't realize like sexy fairies were having a moment. And so I was down in Indie Alley. Like pretty much every author down there had a sexy fairy book.
Okay. I
was like the greatest outlier.
Well, I need to just
there with my reconstructed little bighorn battle.
Yeah, I needed a slight context to understand the sexy, because I live here. I live in New York, but I don't see sexy fairies as like a thing.
So they had BookCon. They haven't held it, I think, since 2019. So it's part of Comic Con, and so it's this huge like literary weekend, and they were all excited. They invited me. I'm like, I would love to come, and I'd never been to anything like that before. I've never been to New York City either, and I loved it. So the first day I showed up to set up was on the Friday. And, you know, people are pulling out their tables and it's like wings and all these like, you know, magical like flower garlands. And like a lot of the authors were kind of like cosplayed as fairies.
Okay.
With like, you know, different color, you know, and that's not what I read. Like in my spare time, I read like, I've been really into like Primo Levi and like, you know, kind of like the more abstract historical. So I didn't realize that was kind of what was going on in like the book scene, and so it was like really, really exciting. So they like stuck me in the middle of all that.
You're saying your historical novel, All I See Is Violence, which discusses sort of indigenous people, violence towards indigenous people in the 1800s and earlier, is not a sexy fairy book.
There's no sexy fairies in my novel.
And you couldn't dress up as like a whatever. Yeah, that's.
There's a lot of that's like a little bit of a minefield.
Exactly.
Like playing Indian, right?
Oh my God. All right. Once again, you can correct me on language, etc., etc. I try to be as
Come as General Custer because he's in there as well.
Exactly. Put General Custer in there. You can do a little Cormac McCarthy style stuff, little All the Pretty Horses or whatever. So
that would be amazing.
I want to go through this. Your background is fascinating to me. Most of the folks we have on here are usually self-made. They've built themselves up out of very, very little. You built yourself up out of even less, right? You were separated from your parents and your siblings. You're adopted. You were forced to attend the Canadian Indian residential school. I want you to talk about that a little bit.
I wasn't forced to attend the Canadian residential schools. My mother was.
Oh, the mother. Yes.
And so. Whereas they start to kind of dismantle that, you know, eugenic program, they switch to what they call in Canada the 60s scoop. And so the Canadian government starts forcibly taking Indigenous babies and children from their parents and placing them in non-Indigenous households. So this is another way to assimilate, because we switched to this policy in the 1800s. I think it's annihilate or assimilate. So they're either going to kill you or they're going to assimilate you. And so this policy was both in Canada and the United States. So they've switched to this policy, and there's, you know, the damage from that is monumental. So we have, you know, the residential schools. What happened, they called them boarding school in the United States. They started in about like 1840. So they're in 30 states in the States, and they were all across Canada. And they start forcibly taking all the Indigenous children as they round us up onto reservations. So reservations are prison camps. Like there's, that's what their purpose was historically. I'm trained as a historian, so I've spent 2 decades studying this. And so, you know, these are prison camps. So they get them onto the prison camp. They start stealing the children and putting them into these boarding schools where they got a lower standard of education. And they also start, opens up like Pandora's box of atrocities. So they're medically experimenting on the children. There's every kind of abuse imaginable. And so in Canada, they start finding mass graves recently attached to these schools. And so when you get into the actual like archival research of it, the Canadian residential schools had a higher death rate than the Auschwitz concentration camps. Mm-hmm. So, we're talking tens of thousands of Indigenous children never came home. And so my mother went to one of those schools where she was abused. And so I think it's in 1994 in Canada, where the schools actually didn't close until 1996, but they started the Reconciliation Committee, which is, it's pretty corrupt. We're not getting very much truth out of there. This is a huge, like, you step into this is like a giant, like, hornet's nest. Mm-hmm. Corruption and, lies and atrocities. And like, no one really wants to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. And I was put into a household that wasn't very stable. And there was a lot of abuse that went on in that household. I was with one brother. I lost that brother to drugs. He got addicted to cocaine, which led to crack. And he's unfortunately, I don't think he's coming back from that. And then my other brother ended up in incarceration because like there's like eruptions of violence. So when you have multi-generational trauma, it kind of manifests in weird ways. It could be as simple as like a migraine headache, or it could be, substance abuse. You can, you're dealing with like complex trauma, which often has attached to a post-traumatic stress syndrome, which kind of can like manifest as like behavioral issues. So kind of navigating all this as a child. I'm incredibly sad. I just go like really introverted. And so I start really diving into like what we consider like literary canons. So I'm really like gravitating towards like Charles Dickens, Ernest Hemingway. And you get in, it's interesting, like even what I think it was before we started recording, I was talking about Primo Levi. So I'm drawn to, writers who are writing from, they had also been through serious trauma, like Primo Levi. He had been through the Auschwitz concentration camp. Ernest Hemingway had fought in 2 world wars. So they had seen a lot and dealt with a lot of the same issues that I had been dealing with. And so as I'm, kind of navigating my childhood, I'm connecting with Indigenous elders, and they're telling me all these like fantastical creation stories. And so, I kind of have like these 2 different frameworks going on. I'm in this really traumatic, unstable environment, and I have these 2 like grounding forces. And you're kind of at like a deficit, right? So like the residential schools and the boarding school, you're getting a lower standard of education. My mother, she just happened to possess quite a bit of intelligence. And so she finished the high school at 15 and she went on to become an Air Force pilot. Mm-hmm. Air Force pilots, like your kind of like base IQ is 120. I don't think if it's anything below that.
And she finished at 15. She finished at 15. Wow, that's wild as well.
So I stopped. As I became a very sad child, I became a very angry teenager. I was very upset about what was going on in the community where I was at, just watching, the devastation. And you kind of get like snippets of like dumb history in the public education school, like the public education system, you're not getting like the full picture. And so I ended up dropping out of high school and I traveled through Europe for a couple of years, and I got really into J.R.R. Tolkien and Impressionist art. I had like a strange sequence of events where I ended up at university in the UK. And it was partly because I couldn't get into university in Canada because I was a high school dropout. That put me at like a deficit, obviously, because I didn't have like the credentials. So I managed to get in the UK based on a series of short stories that they had me write. They were like, well, if you can write these short stories and we like them, you can come in. And I wrote at a high level because I read at a high level from a young age. So by the time I got there, even like on a lot of, the literature, like the required reading, like I'd read most of the books, like both in like history and English literature, and I studied creative writing, and I found it really enjoyable. And so I kind of, I went into it with a deficit, but I just really loved doing it. So I just, focused all my attention on that. Like I wasn't partying on Friday nights. I was at home reading. Mm-hmm. Still like that. Like I'll spend hours, researching every day, pretty much reading and researching. And so as I kind of expand my knowledge and I'm getting into like these deeper nuances of history, you realize that these are patterns that have been implemented on people all over the world, including the UK. They heavily targeted the indigenous Celtic people in a lot of the same ways that they targeted the indigenous people of North America through boarding schools and stealing children and, and these are things that people didn't want to necessarily talk about or engage with. But when you get into like, these sort of modern texts like Ernest Hemingway, or I'm terrible at pronouncing this guy's name, of the Gulag Archipelago. I'm so bad with Russian names. Alexander.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah, there's no way I can say that.
Solzhenitsyn.
But I love that book.
I speak Polish and a little bit of Russian. So
well, you get into like what happened in Russia, and you're just like, So, and at the core of it, like, it's not right. And so, kind of what Alexander was saying, like, because that's a very heavy text of what he remembers happening for coming out against Stalin, right? So he ends up in the gulags, and he smuggles the manuscript out of Russia, and it gets published. And he's like, the greatest thing we can do is kind of remember. So as I'm doing archival research, because I end up becoming a trained historian, and I'm trained in archival research, I just keep on researching, why were we sent to residential school? Why were the reservations happening? Why? And you start pulling like really big parallels, and then you're like, well, why isn't this sort of being documented academically? And so when you do try to get like some of this stuff put through in the academic field, like, you get resistance because it's uncomfortable.
So this is a question this is something I get often. I speak to people who are like, I want to write my story, and usually it's a tragic story, right? It's a situation with their parents, or it's a situation with a I don't know, illness, or something like that. How do you turn all the pain that you experienced into art?
I think you have to be able to digest it. So I think a lot of times when people feel the need to tell, like, so I end up working with residential schools and Holocaust survivors, residential school survivors and Holocaust camp survivors. And like, they had the people who made it through, like, they had this capacity to kind of integrate these tragedies, and they didn't crush them. So a lot of times I think like the trauma, if it crushes the individual, they aren't able to transmute it to wisdom. So if you're able to integrate the trauma and kind of transmute it to like a higher knowing, and that comes out as like art in its most exalted form. And so even if you get into like Impressionism, which is, kind of what everybody views art, well, at least that was like I don't love modern art.
You're allowed to have opinions on the show. It's fine.
You see like splashes on the canvas. Like, it doesn't do it for me the same way. If you look at some of the darker paintings of Monet, these people, they would often paint, like, I think he painted his dead wife. And same with Picasso. If you go to like the Picasso Museum in Paris, you can see like in the Blue period, there's some really dark paintings, but they're beautiful. Even, I remember being in, and there's the Picasso painting of Guernica, like the bombing of the town of Guernica. And it's, it's profound, like, it's moving, like, it touches you, and you realize there's like a deeper core essence of us all that, is irrespective of like race or gender, and that you can kind of connect on that. And so like, we're coming from a place right now where I think like a lot of people, instead of like a willingness to learn, they're just judging things right away. Because I wonder if like there's like, I'm not really on social media, like I spend a lot of time with books. I wonder if it's just too much information. Like people get so much information where they're like, I just can't deal with this. I'm just going to judge it, this 5-second clip, and then move on.
I mean, that's 100% accurate, right? That's exactly what we're dealing with, right? It's a headline. You see the headline, you roll by it. Like the long form writing, everybody's saying that reading is dead. Maybe we'll see. But how do you keep that? How do you maintain that hygiene for yourself? It sounds like you definitely read long form a lot. How do you stay away from, I don't know, scrolling through Instagram all day?
Oh, it just never resonated with me. Like, I didn't have an Instagram account until my book came out in January of 2024, and there was a lot of pressure on me from my publisher there, and so I never engaged with it. I'd never engaged with YouTube either, and so I ended up kind of checking them both out. And I think they're really cool. Like, there's a real like connectivity, but there's also like a real shadow side to it. Then I have teenage daughters, and it's interesting, I guess, just being raised by me. And so I homeschooled them in their formative years, and then they went to Waldorf school, and now like I kind of think we're going to switch back to homeschool. And they have zero interest in like even having a phone. They don't have a phone. They're not like online. Like, they're just like really integrated, and they make like these massive, they have like this whole world of graphic novels that they create. Okay. So I have like hope for humanity.
I just want to confirm, we're not speaking to you in the past, right? Your calendar doesn't say like 1993 currently, right?
Are you familiar with like Philip K. Dick? like
Sure,
the
sure.
man that wrote like, so he started to kind of like unravel towards the end,
Of
right?
course.
And he
Yeah.
starts to, he starts to talk about like he remembers an alternate version of reality where the Nazis won. And so I ended up studying the Nazis quite, intently for a little while. I'm going to say like 15 years ago, it came out of like working with the Holocaust survivors. And so when they kind of base like their racial policies for the concentration camps off of the reservation system in Canada and the United States. So they're really looking at this and they're like, whoa, good job. This is like amazing what you've done here.
Well, good old Henry Ford had something to do with that as well, right?
Well, and IBM as well. So you have these American corporations. And so the fake science of eugenics actually began in the United States in the mid 1800s and is kind of exported to Nazi Germany, and before it's like Nazi Germany. And, they're kind of like picking up these ideas and they're all like sharing these like eugenic fake science principles and they're really like admiring. And so they start basing, the concentration camps off of the idea of like, segregating like different, but then there's this weird switch that happens with the Nazis. It's very bizarre. And like it took me a while. Like I had to go back and read like several documents a number of times because they decide in 1941, the Nazi regime, so Goebbels, am I saying that right? Joseph, the
Goebbels,
propaganda
Goebbels,
minister.
Yeah, sure, Goebbels.
Goebbels, yeah. I often mispronounce names. And
because you read them. You did read them. You read, that's exactly right. You read them all, but you didn't hear them pronounced, which is...
No, I don't speak that much. Because when I get on these things, it's like, let's have a chat. Anyways, he decides that Native Americans are actually, the whole Nazi regime comes to this conclusion that we're Aryans. The Native Americans are Aryans. And they postulate if they invade North America and they get us to go against, the people here, that they could take North America. And then they start using like Native American, like iconography and like different things in their propaganda posters. Like it's so bizarre. Like they have this weird, like ironic and paradoxical view where they're like, whoa, these reservations are a really good idea, but maybe they're Aryan. Like it's like, it was so strange. Like I have these like massive books of the Nazi like propaganda posters, and it was just like, it's so weird. Like I still have problems making sense with it. Then I got into like Philip K. Dick, and I wasn't too familiar with his writing because I don't really read sci-fi, but I saw that Amazon series have
The Man in the High Castle.
The Man in the High Castle. And so he starts kind of unraveling, right? And he's talking about like he has this like alternate version of history. And I thought like, oh, that's odd.
I mean, that's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. I mean, I hadn't even heard about that connection between the indigenous people in the States and Germany. I know that there was some.
Whoa. We weren't connected with them. They had like a weird fascination with us.
Fascination. Like not a direct connection. It's not like you were sending folks over.
And so like what happens is that the US military isn't too sure what to do with indigenous people, like whether or not to like get them involved in World War II. And so this kind of starts going on in Germany, and there's all of a sudden they like make a move where they start like kind of like, fishing to see if we'd be interested in fighting. And we had 100% like enrollment rate. Like, so what I find fascinating is despite all the atrocities the governments have done to us, like we're oddly patriotic, like oddly patriotic. So Vietnam War, the same thing. So I deal with the Vietnam War and all I see is violence. And we had 100% enrollment rate there as well. Like no one was conscripted. And so that was like a big like point of contention in the 1970s, right? As they were conscripting men to go to war. And so I kind of like delve into like, what are the psychological effects of that and like post-traumatic stress syndrome.
How do you manage your stress? How do you manage from your experiences?
I think like being more connected because like, I am like, I'm trained as a historian, but you kind of figure out like time doesn't exist in the way we're kind of programmed to think time exists. So it's not linear, it's cynical, and you only have now. Like the past doesn't actually exist. And the future doesn't actually exist. Like we only have right now. So it's just like grounding and just kind of, being really present.
And what are some of the tools that you do to help yourself? Especially like, remember, like being a historian obviously requires a massive amount of focus, and writing fiction also requires a massive amount of focus. What are some of the tools that you use to help yourself focus there?
I got really into like ethnobotany. So I worked with indigenous elders and like plant knowledge, not like psychedelic plant knowledge.
Sure.
Like the actual technology. And so I've eaten like really close to the earth for more than 20 years now. And like my kids have never even had fast food. So it's just like really looking after like yourself and like the more, so like people get really overwhelmed dealing with these subjects because, you know, the atrocities are really big, but it's really small steps and just like being aware, and it can change like the whole reality. Like it doesn't have to be like this big like protest. It's just like, you know, self-care, like looking after yourself. Like maybe, you know, I walk in the woods every day. Like I live on the tree line of like massive mountains. And so like I spend a lot of time in nature, and it's just like really, you know, it's just really grounding.
I have a tree nearby, so I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat. I feel like I'm very similar in terms of my grounding.
If I was a New Yorker, I just would suggest bagels.
Yeah, bagels. I think that might be the answer. Yeah, I think that's well. I think somebody coming from your standpoint. Obviously, you've used everything that you learned much to your advantage, and I think there's some folks who don't do that. Right? They have issues doing that, and I'm just trying to dig at what are some of the quote unquote tips and tricks that you did to survive this generational trauma. I mean, it's like it's your mother's story. Even though it turned out to be wonderful, like it sounds just horrible to in the first few decades, right? And it seems like you just pulled through. I think that's just the answer, right? Or were there other things at play here?
No, like there's no lifeboats in my reality. Like I haven't had any support system. I was even like, when I decided to go to university, I wasn't met with like, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm the first person like where I'm from to go to university. Like I was met with discouragement and ridicule. So it ended up being like this strange like humiliation ritual, right? And so like they're kind of like anticipating for me to fail. And I wasn't like motivated by like, oh, I'm going to show them. Like if anything, like it made me even more introverted.
Okay.
It's like, I'm just going to
it's obviously from this conversation that introversion is still a major part of your personality.
Existence. Yeah. But maybe that's just my nature. Like, and
exactly.
So for me, it's following your passion. Like everybody's gonna have like something that you're really passionate about, and that's probably, you know, a clue that that's like your life's purpose. Like it could be whatever, right? For me, it just happens to be history, and I love going down these like really odd, you know, dark places. And you can kind of like I'm integrated enough that you can kind of exalt it to like a light. So even like with my novel, although we are dealing with the Battle of Little Bighorn, for me, what really like kind of like a bell rung was I was talking to a Cheyenne elder, and he said to me, "Did you know that there were female warriors?" And like what I found with elders, like an elder's not just like an old person. An elder's like somebody who's kind of like an elevated position because they've like integrated all their wisdom and their knowledge. They can like share, teach, like, you know, guide. And so he says to me, "Did you know there were female warriors?" And I didn't. And like he knew, like if he planted that seed, like it would intrigue me. You know what I mean? Like, he was like reading the room. And so I ended up conducting archival research. And when I got into the Battle of Little Bighorn, like I could see that, so they're kind of on this kill, annihilate, assimilate policy, the US government, and it's been very successful. You know, like this, like we're down to like 1% of the demographic. There aren't many indigenous people. We're not fully dying because like we all have really healthy children. And, you know, we commit. It's not uncommon to be a single mother. Anyways, so about half the warriors, I would say, at the Battle of Bighorn were women. And so when I start getting into the military diaries, like they're kind of bitching about this, right?
Okay.
Right. They're not. And so we're not really like taught about this either. So the women, to make up for the discrepancy in size and strength, they're kind of fighting different. And so, you know, like Custer, he was really seasoned. And so the U.S. military as well knew that, you know, we were pretty skilled at what we did. So they didn't send, you know, weaklings. They sent their, you know, their best and their kind of brightest into, you know, subjugate us. So what happened at Little Bighorn was like pretty shocking just to see, you know, this man had fought through the Civil War. He led like a lot of battles that he had succeeded in winning. Lieutenant Colonel Custer, he like self-proclaimed himself a general, and like everyone went along with it. Even in the diaries, like they're referring to him general. It's like that wasn't general. And, when he gets into like the Indian wars, like he knows this, and he's actually the first military figure to employ scouts. So he's using indigenous people to assist him in subjugating other indigenous people. So we get into like this really gray area. And so race, as we're kind of talking about in the beginning, the fake science of eugenics. So race doesn't actually exist yet. So race, that concept of that comes out of eugenics. So if you're looking at the way like indigenous people would have viewed themselves, it's not through the lens that we would view it as, because we've kind of been programmed to think like race is a thing when it's not. So it's not like this big, like, it's a very, very gray. You got like Indians killing Indians, Indians siding with the government. And so, the US federal government was making both treaties of peace and treaties of land, right? So they are like ceasing land. So they're not all the land stolen, although a lot of it is, you kind of have like these two different things going on. And they broke every single treaty.
Yeah, well.
The U.S. government's broken every single treaty. So we haven't honored a single treaty. I think there's like over 400 of them now. And so in the 1970s, all right, where am I here? I'm losing myself. We got this annihilation. We got the Battle of Bighorn, and the contention is they want the Black Hills, which they'd already agreed to a treaty that the Sioux get to keep the Black Hills, because that's like where these like sacred caves are, where they like connect to God. And so they were like, whoa, like you can't take those. Like we agreed in the Fort Laramie Treaty that, we get to keep those. And they are going on to reservations at this point. And so you have like Chief Red Cloud. He's like kind of got like the people on there. And then, them deciding that they're going to go in and take the Black Hills, the US government, it pisses them off. And so they're like, we're taking these, you all got to get on the reservation. And then you have Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and Gull, who are kind of like, nah, I don't think so. And, they're like, we're mad about this. And they end up having the battle.
This is, okay, that's it.
Leading up to that.
Exactly.
So Custer, I think that he discovers gold in 1874. And so Custer has a gambling problem and he's in deep debt. So you give someone, who's financially, he would obviously get a taste of the gold if he can get the Black Hills, right? Like that was exactly. I could see clearly in his diaries that was his thinking. And he also wanted to be famous. So he would invite like different newspaper like reporters onto these expeditions with him. And he would essentially like play Indian. Like, he would get on the full like fringe suit. He had like his indigenous scouts, like, it was very, very odd. And so I knew nothing of the Battle of Bighorn or General Custer because I'm from Northern Canada originally. And like, that's not something we learn about in Canada. Like we're not, we got other stuff. So I tried to like go, like everything I do historically, I try to do neutrally. I'm not like projecting like, oh, this is good and this is bad. Like, I have enough knowledge to know like, okay, race doesn't exist.
You're telling a story, right? You're telling a story totally. as opposed to you're not giving a like it's not a proverb, it's a story. This happened, this happened, this happened.
And so I'm trained through the great canon. So like I'm trained through like Aristotle. So like, I'm using like the format of kind of like poetics and myths to kind of like pass on knowledge that I've been imparted to me by elders. And I'm trying to do it in a neutral way. I'm not telling you if it's good or bad. I'm just presenting you the facts. And you can kind of read so I'm going to say my novel is probably 70% factual. I did like 2 to 3 years of archival research. And then I also had another historian, Dr. Robert Mallet, go through it before it went to publication to make sure like it was, which you don't have to do.
No, of course not.
You have a sexy fairy, you have a sexy fairy.
Yeah. Well, I wrote two historical based like nonfiction books. I have no background in history and I messed those things up completely. So I envy your skill.
Well, I'm trained in archival research.
Okay.
And like I enjoy archival research. So to me that's like great fun, right? Like that's like an enjoyable Saturday afternoon.
I mean all this is to say, I think what the story here is that you've basically just like you found your passion and you found something and you still have the energy to really express a deep love for it. I mean, I haven't met anybody in academia with like your sort of like complete abandon into this world, which is fascinating to me. It's actually really energizing.
They're so boring, most historians.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm sure they're fine. I mean, but I can't imagine what the parties are like, right?
It's pretty quiet. Everyone's like questioning how the hell I got there. You can't see it, but I'm going to say like 50% of my body's covered in tattoos. And it was so fascinating because I wasn't interested in tattooing until I had two things happen. I was going through ethnographic photographs of where I'm from, and I discovered that we were traditionally like kind of tattooed from head to toe. And I was like, oh, that's odd. And also like the Librettes, right? And they had like the big like ear spacers, and so I'm from the Northwest Territories, and I'm part of like the greater group of the Dene. We're actually the only Indigenous people that were never forcibly relocated. So every other nation in North America has been forcibly relocated, like the Sioux, from their traditional lands to wherever, right? You know, I think in the United States, they got really big on putting everyone in Oklahoma. That was like, and they put them on trains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You know, just like the Holocaust. Use that Pacific Railway network.
So what's next? What are you writing next? What's your next book?
Right now I'm working on Geronimo. And so like that gets very odd as well. So Geronimo, he's like the last person that they can he's like their last formidable enemy. And it takes him 30 years. And he finally just kind of gives up, and he's like, you know what? All right. Like, you got me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has this weird relationship with the military. And so reading the military diaries for dealing with the Apaches, there's some core figures that were very upset what was going on, including General Crook. You have Breeden Davis, of how the Apaches were being treated. And so, you know, they're pushing back against these federal policies, right? Because like they just want the land. And so like the Congress people who are making these policies aren't actually dealing with the Indigenous people. So, and they like straight up know, they're like, yeah, we're liars and thieves. Like I would react in the same way. And there's like a depth of understanding and compassion that I don't think they're really given credit for. And so they're after Geronimo, and they have like an odd respect for Geronimo. But then there's also Lozin, who was like a really powerful warrior and medicine woman that we're not taught about. So she was actually real. And so she fought next to her brother Victorio, and they were kind of like two peas in one pod. And you had like Chief Nana, who was kind of guiding them. And so Nana was an Apache warrior, and he fought up until 94, like years of age. He would get on like his horse and like could you imagine?
Yeah.
Like any of our modern political figures that had the physical capability to get on horseback and fight.
I don't
name names.
Yeah. Trump can barely sit in a chair, and let alone
like individuals
swing
that
a
can't
spear.
walk upstairs.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's like, and so like part of the spirituality, right, is this like pushback against like what we call like Wetiko or like Wetiko, which would be like a mind virus is like evil. And so, you know, Geronimo's a medicine man, you have Lozin that's a medicine woman, and they end up partnering with this White Springs Apache named Noach Delcline, and like he's just like eviscerated for history. Like we don't learn anything about Noach Delcline, and it was really interesting. So he was brought up in Rancho Santa Fe in the missionary. So he essentially becomes like a Franciscan monk. And so he ends up like correlating all like the teachings of the Bible to like the Apache's creation story. And it like has this huge, like he becomes like a prophet, and he's drawing like all the indigenous people to him, like in like a huge radius. So we got like Navajo, Comanche, Apache, all coming to him. And they're like kind of like the groups that traditionally fought each other. You got the Hopi in there as well. And they're all coming to Noach Delcline, who's essentially doing like the first versions of the ghost dance. And so they send like different military figures with their scouts to apprehend Noach Delcline. And they end up like converting to like Noach Delcline's like weird, well, I'm not going to say weird, but, you know, kind of, you know, abstract version of spirituality. So he's like pulling people in, and, you know, they're just like, nope, like we're sticking with Noach. And so, you know, like it was sort of like you come across things like this as a historian where you're like, whoa, that's really odd. Like I need to sit with that for a little bit and really like digest what's going on there. And so, yeah, that's where we're going.
Fascinating. All right. Well, thank you for this. I'm going to send folks over to your website. Let's see, where was it? I had it here just a second ago. Angie Alita Newell, all one word.com. You can get the book there. It's available now. And I think people really should check this out. I mean, the energy that you express here is, I think aptly re-expressed in that book. So I think it's a fascinating read.
It's a pretty like live wire read.
Yes.
And so we have like we to like kind of understand like multi-generational trauma, like it's woven against like the 1970s, because the Battle of Wounded Knee, so the massacre of Wounded Knee, and then the standoff at Wounded Knee with the American Indian movement, and then the Battle of Bighorn are all with the Sioux. So we kind of like see like an echo of like how they kind of braid together.
Well, Angie, thank you for this. This has been fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I hear you have I hear you some little bighorns outside going crazy.
This dog that I have is a nightmare. That's George. He's a terrier, and so someone rang my doorbell, and so now he's just losing his mind, and it's because he wants to go greet whoever's at the door.
So he said it's of vital importance. Angie, thank you for this. This is really cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.
I was so lost, pacing back and forth for 27 months. I wouldn't have known how to love myself if you didn't break my